Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be able to share my work with you today. My name is Amy Muise. I'm an associate professor at York University in Toronto, Canada. And one of the broad questions that we focus on in my lab is how couples can enhance and maintain desire and satisfaction over time in their relationships. And one line of work that I'll discuss today focuses on the role of something I refer to as sexual communal motivation. Now, many couples fondly reflect on the early stage of their relationship. Typically, passion and desire are running high, and sex is frequent and satisfying. But longer term relationships can look different. On average, sexual desire, satisfaction, and frequency all tend to decline over the course of a relationship. And although these declines are common, they're not inconsequential. People who report lower sexual desire for their partner tend to report more thoughts about leaving their relationship. And in fact, disagreements about when and how frequently to engage in sex are one of the top three issues that couples fight about and are a type of disagreement that can be particularly difficult to resolve. But we also know that maintaining a sexual connection in a relationship can have broad implications for well-being. In some of our research using nationally representative data from over 30,000 people, we looked at the link between sexual frequency and well-being, represented here by the orange line. And in one study, we compared this association to the link between income and well-being, represented here by the dotted line. What we found was that having sex once a week compared to once a month in a relationship showed larger gains for overall well-being, so people's overall satisfaction with their lives, than making an extra $50,000 a year. Good to know. But we also found that the benefits of having more frequent sex for well-being tended to level off at a frequency of about once a week. So what I often take from this is that on average, it's important for couples to maintain their sexual connection, but not necessarily to aim to have sex at very high frequencies, such as those that are more characteristic of the early stages of relationships. Now, one of my favorite sets of findings to talk about when I discuss the links between sex and well-being is that even after accounting for numerous important correlates of health, married people who reported ongoing, satisfying sexual encounters in their 70s were less likely to die in the ensuing 5 years. Again, good to know. So given this, it does seem worthwhile to aim to support couples in maintaining their sexual connection over time. And recently, with a great team of collaborators, we used response surface analysis to map both partners' sexual desire on their relationship satisfaction in a sample of 366 long-term couples. Now, this type of analysis involves plotting the findings in 3D space into these beautiful, but sometimes hard to interpret graphs. So I just want to direct your attention to two key takeaways here about how the correspondence between partners' desire mapped onto their relationship satisfaction. So couples in which both partners are higher in desire tended to be more satisfied with their relationship than couples in which partners tended to have lower levels of desire. But interestingly, we don't see any effect of matching. So couples who were matched on their levels of desire were not more satisfied than couples who were mismatched. So taken together, to me, this means that at least in the domain of sexuality, when thinking about how couples can maximize their satisfaction, it seems fruitful to understand the factors that might be linked to higher sexual desire in relationships. But given that desire discrepancies are common, it doesn't necessarily seem important for partners to be on the same page in terms of their desire, but instead to understand how they might more successfully navigate differences in desire or interest in order to maintain their satisfaction. And that's been the broad focus of one area of research in my lab, is understanding the factors that might predict the maintenance of desire over time, as well as how couples can maintain satisfaction even in the face of sexual differences. So first, I want to situate the work that I'll discuss today into my broader perspective on sexuality in relationships. Now, first, there's a growing body of evidence for the key role of responsiveness. So validating, understanding, and caring for a partner in maintaining happy relationships and for overall health and well-being. And at the core of the theoretical perspective that I'll share with you today is the idea that romantic partners are dependent on each other to meet their sexual needs. Arguably, no other relationship domain involves more dependence between partners, given that the majority of long-term couples are monogamous and therefore cannot or are not allowed to get their sexual needs met outside of the relationship, like they might be able to with other needs. Now, of course, some couples are in consensually non-monogamous relationships, and I'll discuss that later in the talk. So, as a result, partners in ongoing committed relationships often have a unique and important role to play in being responsive to each other's sexual needs. Now, situations in which partners might experience conflicting interests, so when partners have a discrepancy in their desire for sex, can provide important information about people's motivation to be responsive to their partner's sexual needs. And when they are responsive, this can be uniquely associated with satisfaction and overall well-being. Now, one theoretical perspective on responsiveness from relationship science that's influenced the work that I'll talk about today is communal strength. So, people high in communal strength are motivated to be responsive to their partner's needs as these needs arise. So, they give based on need without this expectation of direct reciprocation. And this is in contrast to people who tend to be more exchange oriented, who will track and trade benefits in the relationship in order to keep things even. Now, importantly, high communal strength is linked with benefits to people's personal and relationship well-being, something that we've recently demonstrated in a meta-analysis of 100 published and unpublished studies with nearly 30,000 participants that was led by Bonnie Lay, who's an assistant professor at the University of Rochester. So to put it simply, what we show in this meta-analysis is that when people are motivated to meet their partner's needs, when they're communal, they reap powerful personal and interpersonal rewards. Now, in the work I'll discuss today, I applied communal theory to sexuality. And when people are high in what I've termed sexual communal strength, they report an increased willingness and motivation to meet their partner's sexual needs. And then crucially, they are willing to meet their partner's needs even when those needs are different than their own. Now, early on, when I began this line of research, I wanted to understand what people actually do to meet their partner's needs. So I asked participants some open-ended questions about the types of things they might do to be a communal sexual partner. And I just want to share a few examples of the types of things that people said. I sometimes have sex when I'm not entirely in the mood. This type of response came up frequently. I will make sure to have sex regularly in her favorite position, even though it is not my favorite position. I make sure we have enough foreplay so that she gets pleasured, not just me. We do all sorts of things together. Mainly, we're just open about what we would like to try. And as long as those new desires don't go beyond the limits we've set up early on, we will always try it. Now, I like this last quote because it highlights an important point about sexual communal strength. So it's not that communal people will do anything and everything that their partner wants. There are and should be boundaries to this, which I'll discuss later in the talk. But instead, they keep an open mind about what might interest their partner, and then they tend to be motivated to be responsive to those needs. So today I want to discuss some key insights from this line of work on sexual communal strength, namely that people higher in sexual communal strength do tend to maintain desire and satisfaction in their relationships over time, that they can more successfully navigate sexual differences, that being a communal sexual partner also involves accepting when a partner is not in the mood for sex, that sexual communal strength can be taken too far and can backfire if not mitigated by a person's own agency or preferences. And it applies to diverse relationships, including people who are consensually non-monogamous and might be navigating sexual need fulfillment in multiple relationships. Now, the first question I set out to address in this line of work is whether people higher in sexual communal strength do in fact reap personal benefits from their communal motivation. So specifically, are they more likely to maintain desire and satisfaction over time? Now, in the first study we conducted to test these ideas, we had a smaller sample of long-term couples, and they participated in a 21-day daily experience study with a 4-month longitudinal follow-up. Now, this is a design I've used a lot in this line of work because it allows couples to report on what's happening in their relationship and their sex life close in time to when it occurs, and then we can repeatedly sample multiple reports. So both partners complete a brief daily survey, in this case for 21 consecutive days, and we ask them a series of questions about their sex lives and relationship. And here I'm using multi-level modeling, which just means I'm accounting for this non-interdependence in the data, where there's two partners and they're both reporting on multiple days. And then I'm also guided by the actor-partner interdependence model. So this means that I'm looking at the effects of both a person's own sexual communal strength as well as their partner's sexual communal strength. So in this study, couples first completed a background survey, and this had measures of their general levels of sexual desire and a measure of sexual communal strength that I adapted from a general measure of communal strength. And it includes items like, how far would you be willing to go to meet your partner's sexual needs? Each day, both partners then reported on their daily level of sexual desire, as well as their relationship quality. And then we follow up with them 4 months after this 21-day study, and they again report on their general levels of sexual desire. Now, although you can easily see how being a communal sexual partner could be good for the partner, I also consistently find that it's beneficial for the self. So people higher in sexual communal strength, they did report higher daily desire for their partner, and they felt more satisfied and committed in their relationship. And one reason why they reaped these benefits was because they tended to engage in sex with their partner out of a genuine interest in promoting their partner's pleasure or enhancing intimacy in the relationship, rather than out of a sense of duty or obligation. So they tended to be more approach motivated in their reasons for having sex. And we've also found this link that people higher in sexual communal strength engage in sex for these more approach reasons, like wanting to connect with a partner, wanting to express love and intimacy, but not for more avoidance reasons, like to avoid upsetting a partner or to avoid conflict. We've seen this in clinical samples of couples as well, including couples in which the woman is coping with low sexual desire. Now, in this study, when we followed up with couples 4 months later, we found that people who were lower in sexual communal strength declined in desire from the baseline to that 4-month follow-up. But those who were higher in sexual communal strength, they began with slightly higher desire, and they were able to maintain this desire over time. And this is notable since these are long-term couples, and most couples tend to decline in desire over time. Now, I want to quickly point out that these effects are significant above and beyond participants' reports of their general communal strength, as well as personality traits like agreeableness. So I found this exciting when we first started this work because it suggests that there's something about being communal, specifically in the domain of sexuality, that is having these benefits above and beyond people's general sexual communal strength. We also don't find consistent gender differences in these effects, and this is true across most of the studies that I'll present today. Now, let's assume that you're a couple in which partners are high in sexual communal strength, you're maintaining desire over time in your relationship, and then something happens. You or your partner become pregnant. In some more recent work, we've been interested in the role of sexual communal strength in navigating relationship transitions, such as the transition to parenthood. Now, recently, in a collaboration with Natalie Rosen, who's at Dalhousie University in Eastern Canada, we recruited couples who were pregnant with their first child, and then we followed them over time until their baby was 12 months old. We surveyed them twice during pregnancy and then 4 times postpartum when their baby's 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. Now, at the time of this analysis, we had 228 pregnant women and their partners in our study, and 169 of them had completed up to the 6-month postpartum time point. Now, this is a sample that I'll be talking about today, and these should be considered preliminary findings that we're going to further explore in the completed study. So what we did here was assess both partners' level of sexual desire at each of these time points, and then we modeled the trajectory from pregnancy through postpartum. So overall, partners who were mostly but not exclusively men had significantly higher desire than the women at every time point. And in fact, their desire did not tend to decline over time, except for this slight dip in late pregnancy. Partners remained fairly stable over this period of time. But women's desire did significantly decline from pregnancy through postpartum. So, this also suggests that couples might be navigating increasingly large discrepancies in their desire than they were before they had a baby. So, for relationship satisfaction, which we also asked about at each time point, women and their partners tended to report more similar levels of satisfaction, and they experienced similar changes over time. So, they felt satisfied in their relationship during the pregnancy, but this did significantly decline for both partners postpartum. But the key question that I had here was whether sexual communal strength could help couples maintain desire and satisfaction over this time. So, for desire, although people high in sexual communal strength did begin the study with higher desire, sexual communal strength didn't significantly affect the trajectory of desire, at least not within this 6-month postpartum period that we've been able to look at. However, sexual communal strength did significantly predict the trajectory of satisfaction over time. And there were no differences in this between women and partners, so I'll present them together here. So people lower in sexual communal strength, so people sort of less motivated to be responsive to their partner's sexual needs, they declined in satisfaction from pregnancy through postpartum. But those who were high in sexual communal strength, here represented by the orange line, maintained satisfaction during this time, and they were doing so despite the possibility that women and partners are experiencing larger differences in their levels of sexual desire. We will continue to look at this data now that we have the complete sample collected to determine if sexual desire and relationship satisfaction sort of starts to come back up further into the postpartum period. Now, the first set of findings do suggest that people higher in sexual communal strength can maintain higher desire and satisfaction over time, as well as during transitional periods. And although it's implied in the transition to parenthood study that people higher in sexual communal strength might be better at navigating desire discrepancies in their relationship, next I'll talk about a set of studies in which we specifically tested the role of sexual communal strength in navigating sexual differences. Now, there are times when a person notices that their partner is interested in sex, but they might not be in the mood for sex at that time. So, in these situations, when deciding whether or not to engage in sex, people are often not only thinking about the costs and benefits for themselves, but also the costs and benefits for their partner. So, they may weigh their own feelings of tiredness and desire to get some more sleep against wanting to accept their partner's sexual advances and make them feel loved and desired. So I think it's a particularly strong test of communal relationships theory to determine if people are even willing to engage in sex and meet their partner's needs when their own desire for sex is low. So in the next study, we test how communal people might make sexual decisions in these types of situations. So this study was also a 21-day daily experience study. Here we had 101 established couples. So they were dating, cohabitating, or married, 26 years old on average, together for about 5 years on average. And so in addition to having people complete my measure of sexual communal strength at background, I also asked couples each day about their decision to engage in sex. So each day, partners would rate their motivation to avoid the cost to themselves of having sex. So things like feeling too tired, or their motivation to pursue the benefits for their partner. So, the desire to make their partner feel loved and desired. And we also asked them about their daily feelings of relationship and sexual satisfaction. So in this study, we find evidence that taking a communal approach to a sexual relationship has benefits for both partners. So in situations when a partner was interested in sex, but a person's own desire for sex was lower than their partner's, communal people were more motivated to pursue these benefits for their partner and less motivated to avoid the costs themselves. And then in turn, they actually were more likely to engage in sex with their partner in these situations. But it wasn't just about being more likely to have sex in these situations. It was the way that they approached the situation seemed to be beneficial for the relationship. So when they did engage in sex, they felt more satisfied. And I'm showing you the results here for a person's own relationship satisfaction, but we also found the same pattern for a partner's sexual and relationship satisfaction. So what this suggests to me is that communal people don't engage in sex with their partner, when they have lower desire begrudgingly, but they actually are motivated to and enjoy meeting their partner's needs. And then they and their partner both benefit from this in terms of higher satisfaction. Now, since both partners reported on their sexual desire every day in this study, I was able to unobtrusively assess the degree of desire discrepancies each day between partners. And what we found was some degree of desire discrepancy, so meaning at least a 1 point difference in partners' reports of desire on 69% of days. So this suggested that having different sexual needs is common, even among these relatively happy couples that are included in this study. So what we were able to do then is test desire discrepancy as a moderator. So what we were trying to determine is if there are beneficial effects of being communal, even on days when people are reporting these larger differences in desire from their partner. So what I'm showing you here is people's levels of sexual satisfaction on days when they engaged in sex with their partner. Now, what we found is that people lower in sexual communal strength, the dotted line here, reported lower sexual satisfaction on days when they engaged in sex and had lower sexual desire than their partner, compared to days when they had sex but had more equivalent levels of sexual desire as their partner. But then remarkably, the people who were higher in sexual communal strength, they maintained high levels of sexual satisfaction, even on days when they engaged in sex, but they had lower sexual desire than their partners. So in other words, they're buffered against these drops in sexual satisfaction that less communal people experienced when they engaged in sex when, it wasn't as easy, when they had lower sexual desire than their partner. But what about when couples have more chronic differences in their sexual preferences? So in some recent work led by my former postdoc, Rhonda Balzerini, who's now an assistant professor at Texas State University and is also a speaker at this event, we have been looking at sexual ideal discrepancies and whether sexual communal strength can buffer against the negative consequences of having unmet sexual ideals in a relationship. So in this study with 207 long-term couples, Rhonda had people imagine their ideal sexual relationship. So they would imagine the sexual activities and partner characteristics that would be ideal to them. They would then indicate the extent to which their partner met or aligned with these ideals. And it was certainly not uncommon for people to have some degree of unmet sexual ideals in these long-term relationships. So 65% of our participants reported at least a 1 point discrepancy between their ideal and actual sexual relationship. And also, having unmet sexual ideals was not inconsequential. In this study, people who reported more unmet sexual ideals in their current relationship felt less sexually satisfied, less satisfied with their relationship as a whole, and less committed to maintaining their relationship over time. But importantly, having a partner who was high in sexual communal strength buffered people against these detriments of having unmet sexual ideals. So for the people in our study who had partners who were lower in sexual communal strength, again, the dotted line here, having unmet sexual ideals was linked to lower sexual satisfaction. This was also true for relationship satisfaction and commitment. But if a partner was high in sexual communal strength, people were buffered from this lower satisfaction. Instead, they maintained satisfaction and commitment even in the face of unmet sexual ideals. Now, we also conducted an experiment to find evidence for these findings. So we recruited 618 people who were in dating or marital relationships, from Prolific Academic, which is an online recruitment site. Now, these were mostly heterosexual identified people in their mid-30s who'd been in their relationship for an average of 6 years. And all of our predictions were pre-registered on the OSF ahead of time. So first, what we had participants do was complete a series of compatibility questions that were focused on their sexual ideals. So questions about their own sexual ideals and then how they perceive their partner in light of these ideals. Participants were told that we would use their responses to these questions to calculate the extent to which their partner met their ideals, and that we would give them feedback about this later in the study. They were then randomly assigned to one of 3 groups, and here we're trying to manipulate perceived partner sexual responsiveness, which should really be overlapping with perceived partner sexual communal strength. So we're making people imagine or perceive their partners at these different levels of responsiveness or communal motivation. And this is a general responsiveness manipulation that was developed by Harry Rees that we adapted to be about sexual responsiveness. So in the high responsiveness condition, people were asked to think about and write down 2 ways that their partner had been attentive to their sexual needs in the last month. In the low responsiveness condition, people were asked to think about and write down 10 ways their partner was attentive to their sexual needs in the last month. Now, the logic of this manipulation is that it should be relatively easy to recall 2 things that a partner has done, which should then activate feelings that a partner is highly responsive to a person's sexual needs. However, trying to recall 10 examples is a lot more difficult. And then this difficulty leads participants to perceive that their partner is not actually that responsive to their sexual needs. We compared both to a control condition in which people were just asked to write down 5 things that their partner carries around with them. And a manipulation check did reveal that this manipulation worked. People perceived their partner as the most sexually responsive in our high condition and least responsive in our low condition. And then participants were told that we'd use their responses from earlier in the survey to calculate the extent to which their partner met their sexual ideals. And they were randomly assigned to be given feedback that their sexual ideals were either largely met or largely unmet. So we adapted this previous false feedback manipulation, and we told participants that based on an algorithm that is well established at calculating sexual compatibility, the results show that their partner does not really meet their sexual ideals. So they were in the 36th percentile of met ideals. Or they were told that their partner largely meets their sexual ideals, that they're in the 86th percentile. And again, a manipulation check revealed that this worked. There were significant differences between groups in the extent to which they felt their partner met their ideals and were compatible with them. Now, the final step here was to assess our key outcomes of interest. This was sexual and relationship satisfaction. So jumping to the results, perceiving a partner as sexually responsive, so high, low, and control conditions are on the x-axis, and our outcome measure here is sexual satisfaction on the y-axis. So first, what we find is that if you're told that your sexual ideals are largely met by your partner, you're fairly satisfied regardless of how responsive you're led to believe your partner is to your sexual needs. But for those who were made to believe that they had unmet sexual ideals, people who saw their partners as high in responsiveness were significantly more satisfied than people who perceived their partner as low in sexual responsiveness or those in our control condition. Now let's put this all together and we can look at our key effective interest. So for people who perceived their partner as low in sexual responsiveness, so not very responsive, or who were made to believe that their partner was not very responsive to their sexual needs, and those in our control group, when they were told that they had unmet sexual ideals, they remained lower in sexual satisfaction compared to when they believed they had met ideals. So met ideals is the darker orange bar, and you can see in both the low responsiveness, and the control condition that when people have met ideals, they're more sexually satisfied when they have unmet ideals, which is the lighter orange bar. However, people who perceived their partner as highly responsive to their sexual needs did not show differences in satisfaction based on having met versus unmet ideals. In other words, they're buffered from the lower satisfaction in response to having unmet ideals. And we see the exact same pattern of results for people's overall relationship satisfaction. So this suggests that even when people are made to believe that they have these unmet needs in their relationship, when they think they have a highly responsive partner, these unmet needs no longer make them feel less satisfied with their sex life and their overall relationship. So this set of studies suggests that having a sexually communal partner or perceiving a partner as highly sexually responsive can help people maintain sexual and relationship satisfaction, even in the face of sexual differences or unmet ideals. And in recent work led by my graduate student, Stephanie Raposo, who's also giving a talk at this event, we are learning that perceiving a partner as highly sexually responsive might be particularly important for certain people. In this case, people who tend to be anxiously attached in their relationships. Now, people high in attachment anxiety, they tend to desire intense closeness in their relationships, and they seek a lot of reassurance from their partners that they're loved and desired. They typically perceive their partners as being less responsive than their partners actually are, and they're more susceptible to experiencing lower satisfaction and sort of more volatile levels of commitment to their relationships. Now, given that anxious folks tend to view sex as a way to meet their needs for feeling reassured and this kind of intense closeness and intimacy, they tend to use their sexual experiences to decipher the quality of their overall relationships. So in a recently conducted 21-day daily experience study, 121 couples, of 121 couples, we assessed people's attachment anxiety and avoidance at background. And then each day, participants would report on their perceptions of their partner's sexual responsiveness. So my partner was perceptive or attentive to my sexual needs today. And then they'd also report on their feelings of sexual satisfaction and relationship quality that day. So perceiving a partner as highly sexually responsive in daily life was associated with higher relationship satisfaction, as well as higher sexual satisfaction and commitment in the sample overall. So we see this idea that when you think your partner is more responsive to your sexual needs, you tend to feel more satisfied, more committed to the relationship. But this association was especially strong for people high in attachment and anxiety, and they're represented by the orange line here. So on days when a person high in attachment and anxiety perceived their partner as low in sexual responsiveness, they reported significantly lower satisfaction than people who were lower in attachment anxiety. So those are our securely attached folks. But people higher in attachment anxiety, their lower satisfaction is completely buffered. And in fact, it's the same as less anxiously attached or secure people when they perceive their partner as highly sexually responsive. And it was perceived partner sexual responsiveness specifically that was a consistent buffer of anxiously attached people's satisfaction. We did not see consistent effects when we tested general levels of perceived partner responsiveness. And all of these effects remained when we accounted for these general levels of responsiveness. So this said to us that there's something about perceiving a partner as responsive, specifically in the sexual domain, that's really helping anxiously attached folks to maintain these higher levels of relationship and sexual satisfaction. So not only are people higher in sexual communal strength more likely to maintain desire over time, when they do encounter sexual differences or unmet ideals, they tend to be able to maintain satisfaction despite this. So next, although we know that maintaining sexual connection is important for satisfaction, engaging in sex, even when one partner's desire is high, is not always feasible or even optimal. So one aspect of being a communal partner is being motivated to meet a partner's needs, not only when they're interested in sex, but also when the partner is not interested in having sex. And the need not to have sex might be most important during certain times in the relationship, such as the transition to parenthood. New parents, especially new mothers, tend to report lower sexual desire, and couples might be managing larger desire discrepancies. They also report a decline in sexual frequency, lower sexual satisfaction. A third of new mothers and almost half of new fathers are dissatisfied with their sex lives at 6 months postpartum. And new parent couples also tend to report lower relationship satisfaction and more conflict. Now, one thing we realized in the course of studying sexual communal strength is that theoretically being communal should not just be about meeting a partner's needs when their need is to engage in sex, but also being understanding when a partner's not interested in sex. And this wasn't well captured by our original measure. So we developed a measure of the motivation to be understanding about a partner's disinterest in sex. And we refer to this as sexual communal understanding. And in fact, in a validation study for this measure, people higher in sexual communal understanding were more accepting and felt less resentful when their partner declined their sexual advances. So we have our general measure of sexual communal strength that we've talked about in the previous studies, as well as this new measure of sexual communal understanding, which is focused on the understanding of a partner's disinterest in sex. And we thought that this might be particularly relevant during the transition to parenthood. So here we recruited 255 mixed gendered couples with a first child aged 3 to 12 months. Couples were in their late 20s on average, mostly married and together for about 4 years. So in addition to completing our measure of sexual communal strength, which I've described earlier, participants also completed our new measure of sexual communal understanding. So this included items like, if your partner's not in the mood for sex, how high a priority is it for you to accept this and not pursue sex with your partner? Now, consistent with our other study of couples transitioning to parenthood, new mothers did report significantly lower sexual desire than new fathers. And as in all of our other studies I shared with you today, we did not find that when people, in this case, both new mothers and new fathers, were higher in sexual communal strength, both partners, so when both new mothers and new fathers were higher in sexual communal strength, both partners did report higher sexual and relationship satisfaction. So this is consistent with our other work. But above and beyond these effects of sexual communal strength, when new fathers were higher in sexual communal understanding, both they and their partners reported higher sexual and relationship satisfaction. So it was especially important for new fathers to show an understanding and acceptance of their partner's need not to engage in sex during this time. And this actually helped both partners maintain satisfaction. Now, these effects remain significant after accounting for both partners' levels of sexual desire, fatigue because new parenthood, and the age and temperament of the baby. So this suggests that it's not just well-rested couples with, easy babies who are driving these effects. So this research emphasizes that engaging in sex might not always be the best option for couples when their sexual interests conflict, and that not engaging in sex, if responded to with communal care and understanding, can also be associated with sexual and relationship satisfaction. Now, we thought this was an important message to send to new parents. So one of my collaborators on this work, Natalie Rosen, developed a psychoeducational video to disseminate the findings.
You just had a baby. That's awesome. You're giving so much to that new human. But don't forget your partner has needs too. Figuring out when, where, and how to have sex at this new stage in your life can be tricky. We found that when one parent shows understanding of the other's interest in sex, both parents feel better about their sex life and their relationship overall. But that works both ways. Showing understanding when your partner isn't in the mood for sex is also related to feeling more satisfied.
So my colleague has gathered information from new parents who watched this video as an initial step toward developing studies where we might be able to intervene to promote sexual communal strength and understanding in relationships. Now, the findings I've discussed so far provide evidence for the benefits of being and having a communal partner. But can the motivation to meet a partner's sexual needs be taken too far? Now, research on unmitigated communion, this is being focused on a partner's needs to the exclusion of one's own needs, generally shows that this over focus on a partner's needs is associated with lower well being, greater psychological distress. In particular, people who are higher in this unmitigated communion tend to take communal giving to an unhealthy extreme, and then they have trouble accepting support back from others. But at the same time, their relationships are important to them. And in some cases, they are highly satisfied. And then little work has looked at what it's like to be with a partner who's high in unmitigated communion. There's definitely challenges since people high in unmitigated communion have trouble accepting support and being open about their feelings, but they're also solely focused on meeting their partner's needs. So there might be some benefits to the partner. So in the research I'll talk about next, we applied these ideas to sexuality. So unmitigated sexual communion is this communal motivation to meet a partner's sexual needs that involve self-neglect. So this refers to people who are overly invested in meeting their partner's needs. They excessively worry about this and they don't consider their own needs in the process. So if a person is considering engaging in sex with their partner, they could do so thinking, it makes me happy to meet my partner's sexual needs. And this, is usually more in line with higher sexual communal strength. They could also think, I have to meet my partner's needs. It doesn't matter what I want. And this would be more characteristic of this unmitigated sexual communion. So here we wanted to look at the differences between sexual communal strength and unmitigated communion. And we did this in a clinical sample of couples in which the woman experiences sexual pain and in which these approaches to sexuality might be the most consequential. So couples in which the woman is coping with genitopelvic pain or pain during sex can face a number of negative consequences. So they experience lower desire and arousal. Both partners can report lower sexual satisfaction. They have more relationship challenges, so poor communication, less affection. Women in particular report more psychological distress, so things like greater depressive symptoms and anxiety. In some cases, their partners will report greater distress as well. And many couples are coping with the pain for many years. One study showed that the average pain duration was 12 years. So this is a chronic, long-lasting issue for most couples. However, the majority of these couples do continue to engage in sex despite the woman's experience of pain. So we were interested in how her motivations for doing so, whether more in line with sexual communal strength or unmitigated sexual communion, would be associated with both partners' well-being. Now, again, a similar design here, but this is a 60-day daily experience study. We have 101 women who've been diagnosed with provoked vestibulodynia. This is the most common subtype of genitopelvic pain, and their partners. So 99 of the partners were men and 2 were women, on average 26 years old, together for about 3 years. So in this study, we assessed people's sexual communal motivation each day. So here we're looking at how this variability across days. So each day the participants engaged in sex, they responded to items about their sexual communal strength. So things like, during sex, I did things to meet my partner's needs without expecting them to directly reciprocate, as well as their unmitigated communion. So during sex, I was only focused on meeting my partner's needs. They also reported on their sexual satisfaction. Women reported on their pain during sex. Both partners report on their relationship satisfaction and their depressive symptoms. So here we're looking at how these daily changes in this sexual communal strength and unmitigated sexual communion are associated with changes in these particular outcomes. Now, we found on days when women were more communally motivated, so higher in sexual communal strength, they reported higher sexual and relationship satisfaction, less anxiety, and even less pain. And their partners benefited as well, reporting higher sexual and relationship satisfaction. But on days when women reported higher unmitigated sexual communion, this picture looked different. Women tended to report lower sexual and relationship satisfaction, more anxiety, more depressive symptoms, and even more pain. And their partners reported lower sexual and relationship satisfaction and more depressive symptoms. So even though this high unmitigated sexual communion means that a person is overly focused on meeting their partner's needs, the partners do not benefit from this. And in fact, they end up feeling less satisfied in the relationship and even more depressed. So, why might we see these differences? Well, we've begun to explore this question, and it seems that one reason is because people who are more communal, they tend to focus more on these positive cues during sex. So, the connection that they're feeling with their partner and how their partner is being responsive and making them feel desired. They also tend to be more self determined in their reasons for having sex. So, their sexual decisions feel more autonomous to them, and they engage in sex for the inherent pleasure and connection. And this is in contrast to people higher in unmitigated sexual communion. They tend to be more focused on the negative cues during sex, and then they feel detached and distracted and bored and apathetic during sex. And then they also tend to be less self determined in their reasons for engaging in sex. So they might do so because they think that this is expected of others, or they put a lot of their self worth into what their partner thinks of them. And then in turn, they tend to feel less satisfied. So, even in clinical samples of couples who are coping with a sexual problem, being motivated to meet a partner's sexual needs can be beneficial. But this is not the case if people neglect their own needs. Instead, unmitigated communion can have negative consequences for both partners. So, really, the key message here is that it's important to strike the right balance between meeting a partner's sexual needs and asserting your own. So, finally, I recently investigated the role of sexual communal strength in satisfaction for people who are navigating sexual needs across multiple relationships. So, people who are consensually non monogamous. Now, in her book, based on her experience as a couples therapist, Esther Perel talks about how our expectations for our relationship have changed over time. She says, today we turn to one person to provide what an entire village once did: a sense of grounding, meaning, and continuity. At the same time, we expect our committed relationships to be romantic as well as emotionally and sexually fulfilling. Now, Esther Perel's ideas are in line with the model recently proposed by Eli Finkel and colleagues, termed the suffocation model of marriage. This is the idea that in Western culture today, relative to the past, people expect their relationships to fulfill a different set of goals. So they might rely less on their relationship to meet these safety and physiological needs, but they're relying much more on their relationships to fill higher order needs, things like growth and self actualization. And although people who can meet these high expectations they put on their relationships can flourish, many people do not invest the time and energy to meet the high expectations that they're placing on their relationships. So, in response to this, Terry Connolly and Amy Moores proposed that adopting the tenets of consensually non monogamous relationships, so relationships where all parties involved agree that it's acceptable to have additional sexual or romantic relationships, might be one path towards greater need fulfillment. So they're not suggesting that everyone pursue a consensually non-monogamous relationship, but instead they present the idea that offloading some needs to additional partners could be one path towards greater need fulfillment. Now, about 5% of the population report being currently in a consensually non-monogamous relationship. More than 20% report some experience with consensually non-monogamous relationships in their lifetime. And several studies now suggest that people in consensually non-monogamous relationships report similar levels of satisfaction, trust, and commitment as people in monogamous relationships. Now, since I'm primarily interested in sexual need fulfillment, the key question I wanted to test in a sample of consensually non-monogamous relationships is whether perceiving a partner as high in sexual communal strength in one relationship would be associated with satisfaction in another concurrent relationship. So here we recruited 649 people who were in a consensually non-monogamous relationship and currently had at least two partners. So participants were 33 years old on average and were fairly diverse in terms of their sexual orientations. So in this study, participants completed a measure of perceived partner sexual responsiveness or perceived partner sexual communal strength for each of their partners. And they also reported their feelings of satisfaction in each relationship. So let's say that Janine here is a participant in our study. She would be reporting on her perceptions of the sexual communal strength of both her primary partner, let's call him Max, and her secondary partner, let's call her Joe. as well as her satisfaction in each of these relationships. So this would allow me to test not only how Janine's perceptions of each partner's sexual communal strength is associated with the satisfaction in that same relationship, but also how her perception of one partner's sexual communal strength is associated with satisfaction in the other concurrent relationship. So the cross relationship effects, which is what I was primarily interested in. So here we're properly nesting these reports of both partners, and we're sort of doing a modified actor-partner interdependence model. But instead of actor-partner reports, it's perceptions of a primary partner and perceptions of a secondary partner. And just to acknowledge, we know that not everybody uses primary and secondary partner. Here, many people in our sample did, and we denoted the partners in this way. So our results show that within the same relationship, perceptions of a partner's sexual communal strength is associated with higher relationship satisfaction. And this was true in both relationships that were denoted as primary and relationships denoted as secondary. And we also see that perceiving a primary partner as more communal was associated with being more satisfied in a secondary relationship. Now, overall, there was no significant cross-relationship effect the other way. So between the secondary partner's sexual communal strength and the primary partner's relationship satisfaction. But this was an association that did differ by gender. Now, we don't often see gender differences in how sexual communal strength associated with satisfaction, but here we do. So we see this positive association for people who identified as men in our sample. When they perceived their secondary partner to be higher in sexual communal strength, they felt more satisfied with their primary relationship. But we didn't see this association for people in our sample who identified as women. So if Janine perceives Max as high in sexual communal strength, she reports higher satisfaction in her relationship with Joe. But her perceptions of Joe's sexual communal strength are not associated with her satisfaction with Max. However, in our sample, we did see that association for people who identified as men. So theories about the benefits of this offloading or outsourcing needs to other partners would predict that need fulfillment in a secondary relationship should be associated with greater satisfaction in a primary relationship. In this study, we do see some limited evidence of this. So for men, perceiving that secondary partner as more communal was linked to higher relationship satisfaction with a primary partner. But the more consistent finding here is that having a primary partner who's highly motivated to meet your sexual needs is associated with greater satisfaction in a secondary relationship. So perhaps it's the communal nature of that primary relationship that allows need fulfillment across multiple relationships to have the most benefits. So in sum, the work on sexual communal strength to date suggests that taking this communal approach to sexuality can help couples maintain desire and satisfaction over time, and even in the face of sexual differences. Being communal about a partner's disinterest in sex can also contribute to satisfaction. But for high sexual communal strength to be beneficial, communal care should not neglect a person's own needs. And sexual communal strength might also help people more successfully navigate consensually non-monogamous relationships where sexual needs are diversified. So in short, this line of work suggests that being and having a communal partner can help maximize the benefits of sex and minimize the consequences of sexual conflicts and differences. Now, I want to acknowledge my wonderful collaborators on the work that I discussed today, especially Emily Impet, who did much of this work with me, the funding that made this work possible, and the members of my lab, the Sexual Health and Relationships Lab, as well as the Toronto Relationship Interest Group for making my job so rewarding. And thank all of you for your attention today. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or comments about this work. Thank you so much.